When our father died, I was left with nothing. The entire inheritance passed to my brother. I stood at the funeral while he went to arrange his house, cars, and bank accounts. The day our father died, the world seemed to stop, and yet it kept turning. I had never imagined that my life would unravel at his funeral, standing in the middle of a sea of well-wishers and cold hands, while my brother arranged his life without even looking back. I arrived early, alone, a decision I hadn't fully realized the weight of until I was already there. The church was almost empty when I stepped in, the cold air swirling through the empty pews like a silent warning. The candles flickered, casting shadows on the walls as if even they knew that something had gone terribly wrong. I couldn't bring myself to look at the coffin just yet. Instead, I focused on the flowers. They were his favorite. White lilies, each petal soft and gentle, a stark contrast to the knot twisting in my stomach. I stood at the front, letting the murmur of the small crowd wash over me like background noise. The grief was supposed to be mine, but it felt like a weight I couldn't carry alone. And yet, there I was, doing just that. I heard the sound of footsteps approaching, and I knew who it was before I even turned. Daniel, my brother. I should have known then, shouldn't I? The way he walked, his tailored suit, his perfect posture, like he'd stepped out of one of those business magazines, the kind people in the boardroom read to feel important. "Hey, I just talked to the lawyers," he said, his voice cold and measured, like we were discussing stock prices instead of our father's funeral. "They're all set. Everything's in order." His eyes didn't meet mine as he spoke, too busy scanning the room. I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. "What do you mean everything's in order?" He looked at me then, eyes narrowing. "You didn't expect him to leave it all to you, did you?" I swallowed hard, my chest tightening as I realized what he was saying. My father, who I had spent years trying to impress, who I thought still saw something good in me, had given everything to him. And now, standing in front of me, Daniel acted like it was just another day at the office. "He's gone, and I'm just doing what needs to be done," Daniel added, as if he were speaking about a business transaction, not a man who had once raised us. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What about me?" I barely managed to choke out. Daniel shrugged, adjusting his cufflink. "It's all in the will. You'll get the details soon enough. The house, the cars, the bank accounts. Everything's going to be mine. Dad was clear about that. You should have known." And then he walked away. He didn't offer condolences or even a glance back. He just moved on, like it was the most natural thing in the world. While I stood there, surrounded by strangers, reeling from the blow, Daniel was already moving on to the next part of his life, taking what was his, without a second thought. The lawyer's office was just as cold and sterile as I had imagined. When I arrived later that day, the man behind the desk barely looked up from his papers as I walked in. "Mr. Carter," he said, in a voice that made me want to crawl out of my skin, "I'm afraid your father's will has already been executed." I felt the blood rush from my face, my limbs suddenly heavy as I sank into the chair across from him. "Executed?" He shuffled some papers and looked at me almost apologetically. "The entire estate, including all assets, has been transferred to Daniel." I couldn't breathe. The words spun in my head like a broken record. Daniel inherited everything. Daniel inherited everything. I tried to steady myself, but it was impossible. Everything I had worked for, every sacrifice I had made for our family, had meant nothing. Nothing at all. I looked at the lawyer, searching for some form of sympathy, but he offered none. "Are you sure?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. He nodded, his eyes cold. "Yes, your father made these changes 2 years ago. Everything was left to your brother. I'm afraid there's nothing more I can do for you. 2 years ago." That's when I had stopped playing the part my father wanted me to play. I had told him the truth about a bad investment, a decision that cost him a lot of money. That's when everything had started to change. I couldn't stay in the room any longer. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor as I left. I needed air. I needed space. I couldn't breathe in that suffocating atmosphere, surrounded by all the things I'd never have, all the things I had once been promised. I walked out into the cold street, the world moving around me, but I felt like I was standing still, trapped in a nightmare. I couldn't believe it. My brother, the man who never cared about family, the man who'd always been Dad's favorite, was the one who had inherited it all. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, my hands shaking, and fumbled for my phone. I texted him, just 2 words. "Congratulations, Daniel." I hit send before I could stop myself. He texted back almost immediately. No hard feelings. That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of what he had just done to me. He had everything, while I had nothing. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the years of my life I had spent trying to prove myself, only to be cast aside like I never mattered. As the wind picked up, I stood there in the empty street, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. I wanted to scream, to hit something, to break everything around me, but I didn't. I stood there, frozen in place, while the world carried on without me. The days that followed felt like a blur. I couldn't bring myself to call anyone, couldn't even look at my phone. Every time I thought about the events of that day, I felt the sharp sting of betrayal again and again. The anger that had simmered inside me was becoming something much darker. I didn't know where I was going, what I was doing, or who I even was anymore. Daniel was everywhere, his face in the papers, his name in the emails. He was already moving forward with the company, making decisions like he'd been born into power. And well, I was left in the dust, picking up pieces of my life that didn't fit together anymore. I couldn't even stay in my apartment. The air felt thick, suffocating. It wasn't the space I remembered, but a tomb, a reminder of everything I had lost. So I left. I wandered the city, like a ghost, trying to outrun the weight in my chest. It wasn't long before I found myself at the edge of the river, standing on the cold gray concrete as the water rushed beneath me. I could almost hear my father's voice, distant and harsh, as if he were warning me that this was my punishment for not doing what was expected, for not playing the game. I tried to reach for something to hold on to, anything to remind me that I was still alive, but all I found were memories. Memories of a childhood spent in his shadow, of trying to earn his approval and never quite being good enough, of watching Daniel, perfect and untouchable, rise to the top while I was left behind, ignored and forgotten. "Why did you leave me like that?" I whispered, the words carrying on the wind, like a prayer to someone who could never hear me. What did I do wrong? I stood there for hours. The sun dipped behind the skyline, painting the world in shades of red and purple, but I didn't care. I didn't move. I felt numb, a shell of the person I used to be. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of a cheap motel room I'd rented. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't look at it. It was Daniel. He didn't need to send me any more messages. I already knew what he wanted to say. He was gloating. I was insignificant. But I was wrong about one thing. He didn't leave me entirely. He still held something over me. And now, as the days went on, I began to realize it wasn't just the money that had been taken from me. It was my dignity. It was the years I had spent in his shadow, trying to prove that I was worthy of being seen. And now I had nothing. I went back to the office, to the place where I had once walked with pride, where I had worked side by side with the people who had once looked up to me. But that was before everything had fallen apart. Now, the building felt foreign. The walls closed in as I entered the lobby, the polished floors reflecting my every step as if mocking me. The receptionist didn't even look up as I passed, like I didn't exist. I couldn't go back to my old desk. I couldn't face those same people who were now loyal to Daniel, whose loyalty was bought with money and power. I stopped at the elevator. The doors opened, and for a moment I thought about getting in. But then the thought hit me. What was I going to do? Go back to a life I no longer had? Work under Daniel's thumb again? Take whatever scraps he decided to throw my way? The elevator doors closed without me. I wasn't sure when I started walking toward the bar, but I found myself sitting in a dimly lit corner, staring at the amber liquid in my glass. It burned as it slid down my throat, but it did nothing to numb the anger that was building inside me. "I can't let this go," I muttered under my breath. I wasn't sure if I was speaking to myself or to the empty room around me. The bartender placed another drink in front of me, his eyes scanning me with a look I didn't care to decipher. I downed it quickly, and then I made a decision. I wasn't going to be a passive victim anymore. I wasn't going to spend another second wallowing in my own defeat. I had lost everything: my father's approval, my place in the world, my dignity. But I still had my mind. I still had my anger. And if I had to claw my way back up from nothing, then that's exactly what I'd do. It's strange how quickly you can adapt to a new life when there's nothing left to hold on to. After that night at the bar, I stopped looking back. I had no job, no home, no family, and no future to speak of. But I had one thing: anger. And that was enough to drive me forward. I spent weeks searching for work, but it felt like I was invisible. The corporate world didn't care about someone like me anymore. The interviews I managed to land were cold, impersonal affairs. And when I did get a call back, the pay was barely enough to survive. It wasn't the dream job I had once imagined. There were no corner offices or promotions. There were no guarantees, just the harsh reality of living paycheck to paycheck. But I kept at it. I threw myself into the grind, waking up before sunrise, grinding through long hours of meaningless work, and collapsing into bed at night. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what I had imagined my life would be after all those years of sacrifice. But it was something, and something felt better than nothing. Months passed, and I slowly started to rebuild. I rented a small apartment on the edge of the city. Cheap, no frills, but a place of my own. I filled the space with nothing but the essentials, keeping everything bare and simple. I wasn't looking to live a life of luxury anymore. I just needed to survive, to get by. I started working late, taking on extra shifts wherever I could. My body grew tired, but my mind stayed sharp. I became obsessed with one thing: getting back to the top. But this time, I wasn't going to play by anyone else's rules. I wasn't going to let anyone decide my fate. Daniel didn't notice me at first. Why would he? I was just another face in the crowd, just another person struggling to make ends meet. But I was getting stronger, and I wasn't going to let him have everything forever. As the months turned into a year, I built a reputation for myself: quiet, diligent, and fiercely dedicated. I learned new skills, honed my abilities, and networked with anyone who might help me climb. It was exhausting, but it was also empowering. Slowly but surely, the pieces of my new life started to fall into place. I wasn't rich, but I was independent. And for the first time in a long time, I could see a future for myself that wasn't tethered to my father's legacy. But deep down, I knew what I wanted. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was revenge. During this time, I kept hearing about Daniel. He had expanded the company, buying out competitors, building his empire. Every time I passed a headline or saw his name mentioned, a flicker of rage burned inside me. He was thriving, basking in the wealth and power that should have been mine. I started working for a rival firm. It wasn't much, but it was a foot in the door. I clawed my way up, one step at a time, taking on difficult projects, going after contracts that no one else was willing to touch. It wasn't just about proving I was better than the others. It was about proving to myself that I was worthy of the life I had been denied. Then one day, the phone rang. It was a familiar number. Daniel's assistant. She spoke to me with the same impersonal tone she always had, but there was something different in her voice this time. "Mr. Carter would like to meet with you. He's been keeping an eye on your progress," she said, her words clipped and businesslike. I couldn't believe it. After everything he had done to me, he wanted to meet? He wanted to offer me a job? At first, I thought it was a trap. Maybe he was trying to pull me back in, to remind me that he was the one in charge, that he held the strings. But there was a part of me that knew. This was an opportunity. The first real one I had been given in years. I agreed to the meeting, but not without a plan. This wasn't just about getting back into his good graces. It was about taking back everything. It was about making him realize that I wasn't the same person he had dismissed years ago. I had nothing to lose, and that made me dangerous. The day of the meeting arrived sooner than I expected. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie, my reflection almost unrecognizable. It had been years since I'd worn a suit like this. Years since I'd felt like I was stepping into something that could change my life. I had spent too many years angry and broken, but now I was prepared. I wasn't going to walk into that meeting as the younger brother, the one who had always been overlooked. No, I was going in as someone who had earned the right to be there. I had clawed my way up from the bottom. I had nothing left to prove except to him. I walked into his office, my heart pounding in my chest. The office was exactly how I remembered it. Polished, pristine, cold. The same oversized desk, the same framed photos of him with clients and partners. The same subtle air of superiority that had always followed him around. But today, it was different. He stood when I entered, and for the briefest moment, I saw something in his eyes. Was it surprise? Maybe even a hint of guilt? But it disappeared quickly, replaced by his usual confident, calculating look. He smiled as if nothing had changed, as if he hadn't just torn my life apart. "Good to see you, James," he said, his voice smooth and polished, like he was talking to a business associate instead of his estranged brother. I barely nodded in return. "It's been a while." He gestured for me to sit. "I've been following your progress. You've done well for yourself. I think you're ready for the next step." I sat down, my hands resting on the armrests of the chair. My mind raced. This was it. This was the moment when everything could change, but I didn't let myself show it. I kept my expression neutral, focused. I had come here for one reason only, to take back control. "I'm glad you've been keeping an eye on me," I said, my voice steady but low. "But I didn't come here to be your subordinate, Daniel." He raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean by that?" I leaned forward, my words deliberate. "I came here to take what's mine. You don't get to walk away from the years of betrayal and think I'll just fall in line. Not anymore." For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Was it fear? Doubt? I wasn't sure, but he didn't say anything, so I pressed on. "You think you have everything, don't you? The company, the wealth, the power. But you're wrong. You might have been born into it, but I've worked harder for everything I have than you ever did. And now it's time for a change." He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "You're still holding on to that bitterness, aren't you? It's pathetic, James. Let it go. I don't owe you anything." I clenched my fists, but I kept my calm. "Number, you don't owe me anything, but I owe you something. Something you'll never see coming." He chuckled, a short, dismissive sound. "I'll admit, I didn't expect you to come in here with this kind of attitude, but I'm willing to listen. Tell me what you want." And then it hit me. This was it. This was the moment I had been preparing for. The moment I could take everything back. But as I stared at him across the desk, a strange realization washed over me. It wasn't about the money or the position anymore. It wasn't about proving anything to him. It was about power and control. I don't just want a job, Daniel, I said, my voice low and steady. I want your job. He blinked, his composure faltering for the first time. For a split second, I saw him as the man I had once looked up to, vulnerable, unsure. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by that cold, confident mask. You want my job? He repeated, his tone one of disbelief. You really think you can just walk in here and take it? You've got no idea what you're up against. I leaned forward, narrowing my eyes. I've spent years watching you destroy everything we had. I've watched you tear this family apart for your own gain. And now it's my turn to take everything back. For the first time in our lives, Daniel was the one who looked uncertain. I could see it in his eyes. His pride was crumbling. He was no longer the untouchable king of the castle. And I was the one standing at the gates, ready to tear it all down. The following weeks were a blur of calculated meetings, tense negotiations, and unrelenting focus. I had always been good at reading people, but this time it wasn't just about convincing others to trust me. It was about outsmarting Daniel at his own game. The office politics, the power moves, the deals that were meant to keep me on the outside. None of it mattered anymore. I was ready to play dirty, ready to fight for everything I had once been denied. At first, Daniel didn't take me seriously. He thought I was bluffing, or maybe he underestimated my determination. But he couldn't ignore the rise I was making in the company. Slowly, silently, I had maneuvered my way into a higher position, outwitting him every step of the way. I had built relationships with the right people, leveraged my experience, and set the pieces in motion. I could feel the tension growing between us, like a storm on the horizon. There was a moment, a pivotal moment, when I realized I wasn't just chasing revenge. I was becoming someone else, someone more ruthless, more calculating, someone who would stop at nothing to take back what was mine. And then, the day came. I stood outside the boardroom, a glass of water in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest. I was about to present the final deal that would secure my place as the new CEO of the company. It was all coming together. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every strategy had led to this point. It was my turn now. Daniel had no idea what was coming. The door opened and I walked in, my steps steady, my eyes locked on him. He was sitting at the head of the table, that smug expression on his face, as if he still held all the cards, but I was about to change that. "James," he said, as if it was just another day at the office. He barely looked up as I took my seat. "I see you've managed to make some noise. I'll give you that, but don't get ahead of yourself." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just handed him the document, the one that would take everything from him, the deal that would transfer the majority of the company's assets to my hands. "Read it," I said, my voice calm, but filled with an icy resolve. "It's time to face the consequences of your actions." He took the paper, his brow furrowing as he read through the terms. His confident demeanor began to slip, his eyes narrowing as he understood what was happening, but it was too late. "You're insane," he spat, his voice shaking with disbelief. "You can't do this." "I can," I said, my voice low and unwavering. And I just did. The silence in the room was deafening. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of what to do. Daniel's grip on the paper tightened, his knuckles white with rage. "This isn't over, James," he growled, standing up abruptly. "You think you've won, but you don't know who you're messing with. I will destroy you." But there was something different in his eyes now. Fear. For the first time, he realized that I wasn't the naive, broken person he had left behind. I wasn't the little brother he could manipulate anymore. I stood up, meeting his gaze. "No, Daniel, it's over. You're out." With that, I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I could hear him shouting, but it didn't matter. I had already won. The days that followed were a blur of media attention, legal battles, and the final transition of power. I had taken the company, taken back everything I had lost. But more than that, I had taken control of my own fate. The revenge I had spent so long dreaming about wasn't just about winning. It was about becoming something I never thought I could be. Strong, unyielding, and in charge. Months later, Daniel was a shadow of the man he had once been. I had fired him, of course, but that wasn't enough. He had to feel the weight of what he had done to me, to our family. I had him replaced, left him with nothing but his pride, and took away everything he had built. And when I finally looked at him, really looked at him, he didn't recognize me. The person sitting across from him in my new office wasn't the brother he had betrayed. I had transformed into someone else entirely, a man who had nothing left to lose.